Hey everyone, Wonton back to bring you another One Piece deck guide. This time I thought I'd compile what I thought were the easiest meta decks for beginners. And in terms of easiness, I mean the ease of piloting these decks and just how difficult they are in general. I didn't factor in cost just because once you factor cost in, it does just lead to more variables. It just becomes a little bit more complicated. And I just wanted to make a quick video. It's not too super in depth for each of these decks. I just wanted a quick rundown of how each deck plays and why it would be good for beginners. And so, as usual, I do put the deck list in the description down below, so feel free to check that out. And as for the deck list, I just quickly whip them up just based on what I've seen online, looking through Eggman or looking through One Piece top decks, just whatever, just the usual places you find decks, and I kind of just like whipped a quick one together for each of these. And of course, these deck lists aren't like the final deck list that you should be playing anyways. This is just kind of like a baseline, just a jumping off point for you guys. Feel free to mix and match and experiment with them. Just add your own flavor. Everyone has a different play style, and so you're gonna find some cards that work for you, some cards that don't. So I encourage you to just give that a try. And without further ado, I guess let's get started. So first, I am going to start off with Whitebeard, and I am pretty sure at least 95% of the One Piece community think that Whitebeard is the easiest deck to play. On top of being the easiest deck to play, it is one of the strongest decks as of now in OP4. It tops a lot of tournaments. If you see a top 16 representation of the deck list there, you're going to see at least a few Whitebeards most of the time. It's just so strong. Having 6,000 power, it just causes so much problems, both offensively and defensively for your opponent. And on top of that, you have a strong effect where you do start at 6 life, I forgot to mention, but you do draw one of them per turn. So in effect, effectively you are killing yourself, but you are accessing more cards, and you just have a consistent card draw going in. And if you're also an impatient person, I know some people are very impatient, don't like long drawn out games. Whitebeard is perfect. One way or the other, the game is going to end in like 6 to 7 minutes. Either they're going to be able to hold you off and just outlast you, or you're just going to smash them in the face and for all their lives. So this is a great deck, especially if you just want some quick matches in. I'm going to say there are two variants, and this one here, this is the Straw Hat variant. This is one I find is a little bit faster. There is more access to more rushes. You have some aces, you have Luffy's to close out the games, and as usual, of course, you still run Big Daddy himself. And the general game plan for both decks, though, is to just play on curve, meaning, in case you're not aware what playing on curve means, if you are going second, you're turn 2 and you have 4 Dawn, you just slap down 4 drop Luffy, for example, if you have in your hand. Playing on curve means you do just play each turn utilizing all of your Dawn, just to maximize your Dawn usage per turn. And so the game plan for both Whitebeard and Strawbeard is to just play on curve, smash them in the face, and counter out their attacks, either to your leader or to your higher priority characters with all of your 2k counters or your events here. And here is the Whitebeard variant of Whitebeard. As you can see, you just swap out the Straw Hat package for Whitebeard cards, and this deck does play a little bit slower than the Strawbeard variant, but both decks do play pretty much exactly the same. You just still playing on a curve, smashing them in the face, and countering out their attacks. So once again, I would highly recommend, if you are just looking for the simplest deck to play in this game that does very well with a proven track record, I would highly suggest playing one of the Whitebeard decks. Just bring them onto your locals, start smashing faces with it, and watch people rage and call you no skill. Now, if you want something the opposite of Whitebeard, something more drawn out, something that plays into the late game, I'm going to suggest one of the strongest control decks. I'm going to say actually probably in my opinion, the strongest control deck in the game right now. You have Katakuri, who also benefits from having one of the best late games in the deck, all courtesy of this monster here. Once you start chaining big bombs on consecutive turns, not a lot of decks are going to be able to survive that. And on top of that, you have other big cards like 7 cost Big Mom and 8 cost Katakuri, who also play into yellow specialty of life manipulation. Yellow really benefits from having a strong collection of cards. Their cards just provide a lot of power with a lot of strong effects as well. And because yellow has access to such a strong pool of cards, the deck does sometimes just play itself. You can autopilot this deck to a victory, or sometimes you just get some timely triggers, which is the other mechanic of yellow that they specialize in, where they have strong triggers off of life, and sometimes you can just win off of, for example, maybe just chaining a Parasparrow and a Cracker off life, and then a Thunderbolt just wiping out one of their 5 costs. If you do that 3 lives in a row, you're very likely to win that game. Because of all this deck does have a very high floor, meaning you can only be so bad with this deck just because sometimes it plays itself or you just get lucky off of triggers. Kind of like Whitebeard, where Whitebeard, you're kind of just like playing on curve, smashing face. This deck is sort of the same thing, where you're just playing on curve. The main difference, though, between this and Whitebeard in terms of easiness is that at the end of the day, this is a control deck, and so aggressive decks tend to be easier for beginners to play just because they are more aggressive. They follow a very linear game plan, and they're kind of just smashing phase all the time, and they're the aggressor, so it's up to your opponent to react properly and to defend themselves properly against you. Whereas Katakuri is kind of the opposite. So because it is a control deck, there is an inherent there's inherently more decision making involved, because although this does have one of the strongest late games in the game, you do still have to survive to the late game. So I'm going to say it's kind of like an easy to play, harder to master sort of deck, especially when you compare it to Whitebeard. And this deck list actually belongs to a good friend of mine, Michael, who finished top 8 in the last couple of regionals the last few weeks. So just want to give him a quick shout out. Congratulations again, buddy. And for everyone else, if you ever come across him in a big online tournament, his handle on Discord is Dispfire. So if you see that, just be prepared for a bad time. So next up on the list are going to be Film Doflamingo and Film Kid. I'm going to start off with Film Doffy here first. And I think the film package in general is just very beginner friendly because it's very good at playing on curve. You're going to notice that a trend with the decks I've listed so far are that they play very well on curve, and that's because decks that play well on curve kind of provide a crutch, I guess, for newer players to ease into, because if you play well on curve, it just generally means you just play whatever. This is just the biggest card you have in your hand, and so it does help out beginners in the sense that it limits the decision making, where the optimal decision is usually the easiest decision to make. And so by limiting decision making, it does help ease you into the game. And once you're more comfortable with the base mechanics of the game, then you can move on to more intermediate or harder decks. And so with Film Doflamingo and Film Kid, Doflamingo is definitely the slower, more control version of the film decks. This is a very strong leader with a strong ability. And base, you're effectively playing with 2 extra Dawn every turn, which I don't think I have to explain why that's so strong. You can fully utilize out your Dawn, which is great for the film package. And at the same time, you can protect yourself with your events. So it's a very defensive deck, where the main game plan of the deck is to protect yourself with your events, especially since you're gonna be guaranteed to have 2 Dawn up at the end of your turn because of your leader ability. So you're gonna feel pretty safe from that. On top of that, you're gonna have your walls, your Diamante, your Luffy, your Queen, your Uta, which are very strong cards by themselves as well. Especially Diamante, which is, I'm going to mention, a card that Film Kid does not have access to. And at the same time, you're going to be whipping out the film package, where the optimal combo would be to just Luffy into a Brook into a Nami. But just playing Brook into a Nami, or even just dropping Nami and using her search ability, is just going to be very strong by itself. And one of the things I really enjoy with this deck is you're going to end up with a lot of cards in hand by the end of the game, just because you can hide your Nami and your guild behind your wall of blockers and your events, and you're going to feel very safe. It's going to be a very control slow game where you're just grinding out your opponent, just using your counters and your blockers as another resource. I also want to mention that I do have another video on my channel where I talk more in depth about this deck. I give a breakdown of the card choices and just a quick rundown of how the deck does play, and it's followed by a tournament match. So if this is a deck that you seem interested in, please feel free to check that out as well. So here's the Film Kid version. The main difference between this and the Doflamingo version is where Doflamingo is like half film and half everything else. This one leans a lot heavier into the film package, and so as a result, the film cards themselves are a little bit more aggressive and more tempo based as a unit. So where Doflamingo wants to play a more defensive control gameplay where you hide behind your blockers and you protect yourself and your characters with events, and you just generally just outvalue your opponents by just soaking up their attacks or through card drawn searches. This version definitely wants to try to overwhelm your opponent with tempo and just early board control through the help of your film cards, which do summon each other, and they also hit fairly hard. So you're looking to kind of end the game sooner rather than later. This is more of a mid-range deck. I would have to give it a tag of some sort. And it's partly also going to be because Kid has, in my opinion, one of the best leader abilities in the game. His leader ability allows you so much reach, and sometimes it just provides you with just enough to close out games. He is a win condition by himself and is something that your opponent does need to take into account once you get into the end game scenarios, where you can just attach 7 Dawn onto him and just swing 12k into their leader twice, and that's something that they definitely have to keep an eye out for. And I've just seen too many games where this leader just seemingly pulls out a win out of thin air, where the game looks almost lost and he just solo carries the deck to victory. And so it's suited very perfectly for this film package, where you are going to be more often than not the aggressor. You're going to be playing a more tempo, more aggressive game plan compared to the film Doflamingo. And just to round out this list, we have everyone's favorite aggro deck, Red Zoro, which is the strongest aggro deck in the game, or at the very least, the deck with the highest potential to be the most aggressive, because his ability is perfect for aggro decks, where it allows your little smaller bodies, you can spam the board with tiny 1 costs, and you essentially allow your deck to punch above its weight class, where you're powering them up by 1000, and so they're able to just hit 5000. You can swarm your enemy, you can overwhelm them before they really get going. And this is, you can build this deck to be more akin to, I don't know if you guys are too familiar with Hearthstone's like Face Hunter decks, or Magic's like Red Burn decks. This deck can just quickly swarm and overwhelm your opponent in a few turns. They're pretty much dead by like turn 4 sometimes. But contrary to popular belief, I do think that this deck is definitely not, it's not as easy as a lot of people make it sound. There's definitely a little bit more nuance, especially since this deck has fallen off a little bit, and it has fallen off a little bit as more sets are released. It has needed to adapt, and so it definitely isn't as easy as it was back in OP1 or OP2. And this deck list I'm showing you here, this is a more aggressive deck that doesn't run the events, which I think is better for newer players. And you just kind of want to spam the board with your small guys, and then the difficulty in this deck is just knowing when to attack it. I don't believe it's not always as simple. Sometimes it is, but it's not always as simple as just you drop a character, next turn you just swing 5k into the leader. Sometimes that is not how you'd want to play. Sometimes you just want to leave them all active and then just go for one turn where you just swing 5 times with all of your characters. But again, there's depend on a case by case basis, and you do just have to kind of play by the ear. But there are a few different versions of this deck going around now, ranging from aggro to mid range, where the mid range ones kind of run a lot more events and bigger bodies. But once again, if you're a beginner, I do suggest using this one. This one is pretty simple. You just spawn an army of 1 and 2 cost characters, you quickly overwhelm them, you slap on a Dawn or 2 onto your leader here, and then you just start swinging at their face. And you just get them so low that they are pretty much on the back foot and they're fighting to survive every turn. So thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found this guide very informative, and I hope all of you newer players find a deck you guys truly enjoy playing. And as always, please feel free to leave any questions or comments down below. If you have any questions, I do always try to answer them as quick as I can. And as always, if you do like this type of content, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. And until next time, I'll talk to you guys later.